The summoning. The obsidian pillars of the Grand Convocation Chamber pierced upward into darkness, their surfaces carved with glyphs that predated most known civilizations. Torchlight flickered across the assembled delegates, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters along the ancient walls. Chancellor Vex Theron of the crystalline hegemony stood at the ceremonial podium, his translucent form refracting the amber light into rainbow shards. Around the circular chamber, representatives from 47 star systems waited in their designated positions, arranged according to protocols established 12,000 years ago. "We gather beneath the eternal witness," Vex Theron intoned, his voice resonating with harmonic frequencies that made the air shimmer. As their ancestors gathered before them, to determine the fate of the disputed meridian sectors. Beside him, High Arbiter Kelshera of the Void Nexus raised her 6 arms in the traditional gesture of acknowledgement. Her midnight blue skin seemed to absorb the light around her. "The blood cycles have turned. The Treaty of Shattered Moons demands resolution. We invoke the ancient rites." In the gallery reserved for observers, Dr. Meridian Cross adjusted her tablet and tried not to fidget. As Earth's newly appointed representative to the Galactic Coordination Assembly, she'd been warned that her first major convocation would be ceremonially intensive. That had been an understatement. The 53-year-old political scientist had spent 30 years studying intergovernmental organizations back on Earth. The UN, the EU, ASEAN, she knew parliamentary procedure inside and out. But nothing had prepared her for this. "The flame of grievance must be lit," proclaimed Ambassador Thorax, his insectoid mandibles clicking rhythmically. The Hive Collective's representative wore ceremonial armor that gleamed like burnished copper. A crystalline vessel was brought forth by robed attendants. Inside swirled something that looked like liquid starlight mixed with smoke. Vex Theron began chanting in Proto-Galactic, a language so old that only scholars bothered learning it anymore. Meridian watched as the ritual unfolded. First came the invocation of ancient grievances, which apparently required each delegation to list every slight, real or perceived, dating back centuries. The crystalline hegemony and the void nexus had been enemies for 6,000 years, and they intended to mention every single battle. After 40 minutes, they were still on century 52. Her assistant, a young Terran named Jason Kowalski, leaned over and whispered, "Dr. Cross, at this rate will be here for 3 weeks. The packet said, extended duration," she muttered back. "I thought they meant a few days." "The last convocation of this type took 14 months, whispered Envoy Lyra, a feline-featured delegate from the Whisker Worlds who occupied the adjacent observation seat. Her orange and white striped fur was immaculately groomed. They had to import food shipments. Meridian's eyes widened. 14 months. "It's tradition," Lyra explained, her tail swishing diplomatically. "The rites of convocation must be followed precisely. Every syllable, every gesture, every ceremonial pause, it's all prescribed in the Codex Assembleum." On the chamber floor, Vex Theron had moved on to the recitation of territorial claims. A holographic star map materialized above the center of the room, and he began pointing at systems with a ceremonial staff that glowed with each emphasis. By right of first discovery, second discovery, and the accord of the shimmering veil, the crystalline hegemony claims sovereignty over the meridian sectors, subsections Alpha through Omega 7, including all stellar bodies, orbital stations, and quantum foam deposits. "Objection." Kelshera's voice boomed. "The Void Nexus invokes the precedent of the Broken Crown. Our claim supersedes by virtue of the Crimson Accords." The Crimson Accords were nullified only according to the crystalline interpretation of the Treaty of. They were off again, diving into legal precedents that required historical context going back millennia. Meridian watched as other delegates settled in, some literally unfurling sleeping cushions. This was going to be a long session. By hour 6, they had moved to the ceremonial dance of diplomatic positions, which required delegates to physically walk through their arguments using prescribed movements around the chamber. Meridian's back ached from the stone bench. By hour 12 she'd had enough. She stood up. Jason grabbed her sleeve. "Dr. Cross, what are you doing?" "Something I should have done hours ago," she said firmly. From her bag she pulled out a small, unassuming book with a brown cover. The title read, "Robert's Rules of Order, Newly Revised." Lyra's eyes widened. "What is that?" "Parliamentary procedure," Meridian said. "Earth style." She walked down to the chamber floor. Every eye turned toward her, multifaceted insect eyes, crystalline optical sensors, the dark pools of Kelshera's gaze. The Terran observer had breached protocol by leaving her seat. Forgiveness, honored delegates, Meridian said, her voice clear and professional. I believe I can help expedite these proceedings. Vextheron's form pulsed with indignation. The rites cannot be interrupted. This is unprecedented. I'm not interrupting, Meridian said calmly. I'm proposing a procedural amendment, if I may. The chamber fell silent. In 12,000 years of convocations, no one had ever proposed changing the procedure. The motion. The silence in the grand convocation chamber stretched like pulled taffy. Meridian stood alone on the ancient floor, acutely aware that 47 sets of alien eyes were fixed upon her with expressions ranging from shock to fury. Chancellor Vextheron recovered first, his crystalline form flickering between colors that Meridian's briefing materials had indicated meant confused outrage. Observer Cross of Terra, he said, his voice dripping with harmonic disdain, you are not recognized to speak. The rites of convocation have no provision for observer participation. You dishonor this assembly with your point of order, Meridian interrupted, flipping open her book. I'm invoking Clause 773 of the Galactic Coordination Assembly Charter, which states that any member species may propose procedural modifications if said modifications promise to achieve the Assembly's stated goals more efficiently. Kelshera's 6 arms crossed in what Meridian had learned was the void nexus equivalent of a skeptical frown. Terra has only been a member for 2 standard years. You dare cite charter provisions to us? I do, Meridian said evenly. And unless I'm mistaken, the charter supersedes even the Codex Assemblyum when it comes to procedural matters. It was part of the integration accords. She pulled out her tablet, scrolling to the relevant section. Article 41, subsection 9. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Several delegates were now consulting their own data devices. Ambassador Thorax's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The human is technically correct. The charter does allow such proposals. His compound eyes glittered. Though in 17,000 years of galactic coordination, no one has ever attempted it. Then perhaps it's time someone did, Meridian replied. Vextheron's glow intensified to an almost blinding brightness. Even if you have the legal standing which I dispute, what could Terra possibly offer? Your species has only just achieved faster-than-light travel. You know nothing of our traditions, our history, our sacred. Your inefficiency, Meridian cut in. She immediately softened her tone. Honored Chancellor, I mean no disrespect to your traditions. But I've been observing for 12 hours, and by my calculations at the current pace, this convocation will require approximately 417 days to reach even preliminary conclusions. Tradition requires thoroughness, intoned High Priestess Zuexalia of the Resonance Communion, her song-like voice carrying harmonics that made the air vibrate. We do not rush what has been perfected over millennia. I'm not suggesting you rush, Meridian said. I'm suggesting you organize. She held up her copy of Robert's Rules. This book contains a system of parliamentary procedure developed on Earth over hundreds of years. It's designed to allow large groups to make decisions efficiently while protecting minority rights and ensuring everyone gets heard. Envoy Lyra had descended from the observer gallery, her curiosity apparently overcoming diplomatic caution. How efficient are we talking? Well, Meridian said, using these rules I've seen assemblies of similar size resolve complex, multi-party disputes in a matter of hours or days instead of months. Impossible, Vextheron declared. The complexity of our current dispute alone requires you to list every historical grievance dating back 6,000 years? Meridian challenged gently. Honored Chancellor, does reciting Century 52's Battle of the Crimson Nebula actually help resolve whether the crystalline hegemony or the void nexus has rights to the meridian sectors today? Kelshera shifted, her midnight skin rippling. The historical context establishes precedent, which can be submitted in writing as background documentation, Meridian countered, rather than spoken aloud for days on end. Robert's Rules would allow you to submit historical briefs, have them entered into the record, and then move directly to debating the actual current dispute. She could see several delegates exchanging glances. Ambassador Thorax was consulting with his hive mates through what appeared to be pheromonal signals. You propose we abandon 12,000 years of tradition, Vextheron said coldly, for the untested methods of a species that has barely left its own star system? I propose, Meridian said carefully, that we test these methods. If they work, we save months of everyone's time. If they don't, we've lost perhaps a day of experimentation, and you can return to the traditional rites with no harm done. A day. Kelshera's laugh was like wind chimes in a storm. You truly believe you can demonstrate the value of your system in one day? Meridian smiled. Give me 6 hours. If I can't show you a faster path to resolution, I'll return to the observer gallery and won't speak again. The chamber erupted in discussion. Delegates who hadn't moved in hours were suddenly animated, gesturing and arguing. The Whisker World's contingent was purring in debate. The Hive Collective was clicking and chirping. Even the normally stoic Stone Council representatives were shifting their massive forms, their rock-like skin grinding as they turned to confer. Jason appeared at Meridian's elbow, looking pale. Dr. Cross, are you sure about this? If you fail. If I fail, we sit here for 14 months anyway, she whispered back. But I've been studying the Charter and the Codex for 2 years, Jason. There's nothing sacred about inefficiency. These rituals have just never been questioned before. Order. Vex Theron's voice boomed, enhanced by the chamber's acoustics. The convocation will come to order. The delegates settled, though the air still buzzed with agitated energy. Observer Cross, the Chancellor continued, your proposal is highly irregular. However, he paused, and Meridian could have sworn she saw something like hope flicker across his translucent features. The Charter does grant you standing. We shall put it to a vote. All those in favor of allowing the Terran observer 6 hours to demonstrate her alternative procedures, indicate by the traditional sign. Around the chamber, lights began to glow, some hesitantly, others brightly. When the count was tallied, 32 of the 47 delegations had voted in favor. Meridian released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The motion carries, Vex Theron announced, sounding simultaneously annoyed and intrigued. You have 6 hours, Observer Cross. Do not waste them. Meridian opened Robert's Rules to the first chapter and smiled. Let's begin with the basics. First, we need to establish that this body is properly constituted as an assembly. The revolution. Meridian stood before the assembled delegates, her tablet synced to the chamber's central holographic display. Behind her, a simple organizational chart materialized, something that had apparently never existed in 12,000 years of convocations. The first principle, she began, is that this body needs a clear structure. Right now, you have Chancellor Vex Theron acting as what appears to be moderator, advocate for the crystalline hegemony, and judge simultaneously. That creates conflicts of interest. Vex Theron's colors shifted to defensive purple. The role of Chancellor has always encompassed multiple functions that should be separated, Meridian finished. Under Robert's Rules, we need a presiding officer whose sole job is to facilitate discussion and maintain order, not to advocate for one side. They must remain neutral. Ambassador Thorax's antennae twitched. And who would serve this function? The Chancellor could, if the crystalline hegemony withdraws his dual role as their advocate. Or we elect a temporary chair just for this convocation. She looked around the chamber. Someone respected by all parties. There is no one respected by all parties, Kelshera said bluntly. That's why we've been fighting for 6 millennia. Then someone disinterested in the outcome, Meridian suggested. What about High Priestess Ziwa Exalia? The Resonance Communion has no territorial claims in the Meridian sectors. The High Priestess's harmonics shifted to a thoughtful frequency. I would consider this role. Though I know nothing of your Robert's Rules. I'll guide you through it, Meridian promised. The chair's job is primarily to recognize speakers, maintain decorum and call votes. Everything else is handled by the assembly itself. After a brief consultation, Ziwa Exalia was elected temporary chair by voice vote, another innovation that took 30 seconds instead of the traditional hour-long elevation ceremony. Second principle, Meridian continued, now addressing Ziwa Exalia. We need an agenda. A clear written list of what we're deciding in order of importance. The rites prescribe the order of, Vex Theron began. The rites prescribe the order of ritual actions, Meridian interrupted, not the order of actual decisions. What is this convocation's goal? What question are we trying to answer? Silence fell. The delegates looked at each other. Finally, Envoy Lyra spoke up. We're determining sovereignty over the Meridian sectors. That's the core issue. Excellent, Meridian said. So that's agenda item 1, resolve territorial sovereignty of the Meridian sectors. What else needs to be decided? Reparations for the siege of Quantum 7, Ambassador Thorax clicked. Resource sharing agreements, added Councillor Granite Vein of the Stone Council, his voice like grinding boulders. Navigation rights through the Azure Corridor, suggested Emissary Shimmer of the Light Weavers. Meridian typed rapidly, and the holographic display updated with a numbered list. Perfect. Now, under Robert's rules, we take these one at a time. We don't move to item 2 until item 1 is resolved. But the items are interconnected. Kelshera protested. We cannot discuss sovereignty without discussing reparations without discussing. We can note the connections, Meridian said, but we make decisions sequentially. Otherwise, you end up in circular arguments that never conclude. She pulled up her notes from Hour 3 of the traditional rites. Case in point, I watched Chancellor Vextherin and High Arbiter Kelshera argue about whether the Crimson Accords were nullified by the Treaty of Shattered Moons, which led into whether the treaty was valid without ratification by the Void Nexus, which led into why ratification was delayed, which traced back to the Siege of Quantum 7, which required discussing who started the siege, which depended on sovereignty claims, which brought you back to the Crimson Accords. You completed the circle 4 times in 90 minutes. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. Apparently no one had noticed the loop. So we take item 1, sovereignty of the Meridian sectors, Meridian said. High Priestess, would you open the floor for motions? Xalia's harmonics wavered uncertainly. I open the floor for motions? It means you're allowing someone to make a formal proposal, Meridian explained. A motion is a specific actionable proposal that can be voted on. Vextherin stood, shimmering with renewed purpose. I move that the Meridian sectors be recognized as territory of the crystalline hegemony based on the right of first discovery. Is there a second? Xalia asked, reading from the quick reference guide Meridian had transmitted to her. I second the motion, said Legate Prism of the Refraction Coalition, a hegemony ally. The motion is now open for debate, Meridian prompted. Kelshera rose immediately. I wish to propose an amendment. One moment, Meridian interjected. Under Robert's rules you have several options. You can debate the current motion, propose a substitute motion, or propose an amendment. Which would you like to do? What's the difference? Kelshera asked. Debate means you argue against the motion as stated. An amendment changes part of the motion while keeping its basic structure. A substitute motion replaces it entirely with a different proposal. Kelshera considered. I propose a substitute motion, that the Meridian sectors be recognized as territory of the Void Nexus based on the precedent of the Broken Crown and the Crimson Accords. Is there a second? Xalia asked. Seconded, said Shadow Speaker Nox, another Void Nexus ally. Now we debate the substitute first, Meridian explained. If it fails, we return to the original motion. High Priestess set a time limit for debate, say 15 minutes per side. 15 minutes? Vextherin sputtered. To debate a claim spanning 6,000 years? To present your best arguments, Meridian corrected. You can submit detailed historical documentation in writing. But the Assembly doesn't need to hear every detail spoken aloud. Give us your strongest points, your clearest evidence, your most compelling case. 15 minutes is enough for that. Jason had materialized with a timer. The debate began. What followed was a revelation. Stripped of ritual circumlocution and forced to prioritize their arguments, both sides presented concise, coherent cases. Vextherin focused on archaeological evidence of crystalline settlements dating back 8,000 years. Kelshera countered with genetic markers proving Void Nexus populations had inhabited the sectors for 10,000 years before the crystalline expansion. When the debate time expired, Meridian introduced another innovation, questions from the floor. Ambassador Thorax raised a claw. Chancellor Vextherin, your archaeological evidence. Were those settlements permanent or seasonal outposts? Vextherin hesitated. The distinction is unclear from the ruins. High Arbiter Kelshera, Councillor Granite Vein rumbled, your genetic evidence shows population presence but not civilization. Were they settled communities or nomadic groups? Now Kelshera paused. The genetic markers alone cannot determine settlement patterns. Meridian watched the realization dawn across the chamber. Neither side had an ironclad claim. They'd been arguing for 6,000 years over a question that couldn't be definitively answered by historical precedent alone. Perhaps, Envoy Lyra suggested quietly, we need a different approach to this motion entirely. Such as? Xalia asked. Joint sovereignty, Lyra proposed. Or a partition. Or a resource-sharing agreement that makes the sovereignty question less relevant. Meridian smiled. Now we're getting somewhere. Would someone like to make that as a motion? The breakthrough. The atmosphere in the Grand Convocation Chamber had shifted dramatically. Where before there had been rigid adherence to ancient formula, there was now an almost palpable energy of possibility. Delegates who had barely moved for hours were leaning forward, engaged. Envoy Lyra stood, her tail held high with confidence. I move that the meridian sectors be designated as a shared administrative zone, with joint sovereignty by the crystalline hegemony and the void nexus, subject to the establishment of a cooperative governance structure. Meridian felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of creative solution that efficient procedure could unlock. The delegates had been so locked into their historical positions that neither had considered alternatives. Is there a second? High Priestess Zeuxalia asked, her harmonics carrying a note of hope. I second, Ambassador Thorax clicked, his mandibles spreading in what Meridian had learned was the hive collective equivalent of a smile. But Vextheron's colors flashed angry crimson. Absolutely not. The crystalline hegemony has held these territories for. Point of order, Meridian interrupted gently. Chancellor, you're no longer acting as presiding officer. If you want to debate the motion, you need to be recognized by the chair and speak from your delegation's position. Vextheron looked like he wanted to argue, then visibly restrained himself. High Priestess, I request recognition to speak against the motion. You are recognized, Chancellor, Zeuxalia said, clearly enjoying her new role. The crystalline hegemony cannot accept joint sovereignty, Vextheron stated, his voice controlled but firm. It violates every principle of territorial integrity that has governed galactic law since. Since when? Meridian asked. And I'm genuinely asking. When was the principle of absolute territorial sovereignty established? Vextheron consulted his data crystal. The Treaty of the First Assembly, approximately 14,000 years ago. And has it been amended since then? A long pause. No. So we're following a 14,000-year-old framework, Meridian observed, designed for a galaxy that had dozens of spacefaring species, not thousands. Might it be worth considering whether that framework still serves us? Kelshera rose and Meridian braced for opposition. But the High Arbiter surprised her. The human makes a valid point, Kelshera said slowly. The void nexus has also been bound by this assumption of absolute sovereignty. But what has it gained us? 6,000 years of conflict. Millions of lives lost. Resources wasted on military buildup rather than development. High Arbiter, hissed one of her advisors, you cannot seriously consider? I can consider whatever benefits the void nexus, Kelshera cut him off. And I am beginning to question whether perpetual war serves us better than shared prosperity. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Meridian caught Jason's eye, and her assistant gave her a subtle thumbs up. If I may, Councillor Granite Vein rumbled, his massive stone form shifting. The Stone Council has observed this conflict for millennia. We have always wondered why both parties fight over the whole when half of something is better than all of nothing. Because accepting half implies our claim to the whole was invalid, Vextheron said, but his colors had shifted to a contemplative blue-green. Does it? Meridian asked. Or does it simply acknowledge that the other side also has a valid claim? Two truths can coexist. Your people did settle those sectors 8,000 years ago, that's true. The void nexus populations were there 10,000 years ago, also true. Both claims have merit. Fighting to determine which truth is more true, is what's kept you locked in conflict. The human is wise beyond her years, High Priestess Zeuxalia sang. But the motion before us requires details. What would joint sovereignty mean in practice? The breakthrough. The atmosphere in the Grand Convocation Chamber had shifted dramatically. Where before there had been rigid adherence to ancient formula, there was now an almost palpable energy of possibility. Delegates who had barely moved for hours were leaning forward, engaged. Envoy Lyra stood, her tail held high with confidence. I move that the meridian sectors be designated as a shared administrative zone, with joint sovereignty by the crystalline hegemony and the void nexus, subject to the establishment of a cooperative governance structure. Meridian felt a surge of satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of creative solution that efficient procedure could unlock. The delegates had been so locked into their historical positions that neither had considered alternatives. Is there a second? High Priestess Zeuxalia asked, her harmonics carrying a note of hope. I second, Ambassador Thorax clicked, his mandibles spreading in what Meridian had learned was the hive collective equivalent of a smile. But Vextheron's colors flashed angry crimson. Absolutely not. The crystalline hegemony has held these territories for. Point of order, Meridian interrupted gently. Chancellor, you're no longer acting as presiding officer. If you want to debate the motion, you need to be recognized by the chair and speak from your delegation's position. Vex Theron looked like he wanted to argue, then visibly restrained himself. High Priestess, I request recognition to speak against the motion. You are recognized, Chancellor, Zuexalia said, clearly enjoying her new role. The crystalline hegemony cannot accept joint sovereignty, Vex Theron stated, his voice controlled but firm. It violates every principle of territorial integrity that has governed galactic law since. Since when? Meridian asked. And I'm genuinely asking. When was the principle of absolute territorial sovereignty established? Vex Theron consulted his data crystal. The Treaty of the First Assembly, approximately 14,000 years ago. And has it been amended since then? A long pause. No. So we're following a 14,000-year-old framework, Meridian observed, designed for a galaxy that had dozens of spacefaring species, not thousands. Might it be worth considering whether that framework still serves us? Kelshera rose and Meridian braced for opposition. But the High Arbiter surprised her. The human makes a valid point, Kelshera said slowly. The Void Nexus has also been bound by this assumption of absolute sovereignty. But what has it gained us? 6,000 years of conflict. Millions of lives lost. Resources wasted on military buildup rather than development. High Arbiter, hissed one of her advisors, you cannot seriously consider? I can consider whatever benefits the Void Nexus, Kelshera cut him off. And I am beginning to question whether perpetual war serves us better than shared prosperity. The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Meridian caught Jason's eye, and her assistant gave her a subtle thumbs up. If I may, Councillor Granite Vein rumbled, his massive stone form shifting. The Stone Council has observed this conflict for millennia. We have always wondered why both parties fight over the whole when half of something is better than all of nothing. Because accepting half implies our claim to the whole was invalid, Vex Theron said, but his colors had shifted to a contemplative blue-green. Does it? Meridian asked. Or does it simply acknowledge that the other side also has a valid claim? Two truths can coexist. Your people did settle those sectors 8,000 years ago, that's true. The Void Nexus populations were there 10,000 years ago, also true. Both claims have merit. Fighting to determine which truth is more true, is what's kept you locked in conflict. The human is wise beyond her years, High Priestess Zuexalia sang. But the motion before us requires details. What would joint sovereignty mean in practice? The resistance. The momentum from resolving the Meridian sector dispute carried through the next agenda item, reparations for the siege of Quantum 7. Using the same structured debate and amendment process, the Assembly reached a compromise in under 2 hours. A mutual reparations exchange that acknowledged wrongs on both sides rather than trying to calculate who owed whom more. But as they moved to the third item, navigation rights through the Azure Corridor, Meridian noticed a shift in the chamber's energy. High Priestess, said Hierophant Voidwalker of the Shadow Covenant, rising with deliberate slowness. I must raise an objection. Zuexalia's harmonics carried a note of concern. You are recognized, Hierophant. Voidwalker was an imposing figure, his form composed of what appeared to be living darkness barely contained within a humanoid outline. The Shadow Covenant was one of the oldest civilizations in the Galactic Coordination Assembly, and they had remained silent through the previous discussions. What we are doing here, Voidwalker intoned, his voice like an echo from a deep well, is a violation of everything the Assembly stands for. We are abandoning 12,000 years of tradition for the untested methods of a species that has been spacefaring for less time than some of our buildings have existed. Murmurs of agreement rippled through certain delegations. Meridian had known this was coming. The initial success had won over pragmatists, but there would always be traditionalists. The rights of convocation, Voidwalker continued, were established by the founders for a reason. They ensure that all voices are heard, that all history is considered, that decisions are not made in haste. With respect, Hierophant, Meridian said carefully, I don't believe anyone is being excluded. In fact, more voices have been heard in the past 6 hours than in the previous 12 combined. Before, only those conducting the ritual spoke. Now, any delegate can make motions, propose amendments, ask questions. Chaos, Voidwalker interrupted. You call it efficiency. I call it chaos. The rights provide structure, order, predictability. They provide stagnation, Envoy Lyra countered, surprising Meridian with her vehemence. I have attended 3 convocations in my lifetime, Hierophant. Each lasted over a year. Each ended with minimal actual resolution. We perform the rituals beautifully, but we accomplish nothing. Accomplishment is not the only measure of value, Voidwalker replied. The rites serve to maintain unity, to remind us of our shared history, to waste time, Ambassador Thorax clicked bluntly. I say this with respect for tradition, but the Hive Collective has pressing matters in 17 other star systems. We cannot spend 14 months debating what could be decided in 14 days. Or 14 hours, Councillor Granite Vein added. The Stone Council agrees with the Hive Collective. We are patient, but even stone erodes with sufficient wasted time. Voidwalker's form seemed to darken. Then you would throw away everything that makes us who we are? The Shadow Covenant will not participate in this mockery of proper procedure. He began to turn away from the chamber floor. Point of order, Meridian said quickly. Voidwalker paused. I do not recognize your points of order, human. Nevertheless, Meridian pressed on, under the Assembly Charter, no delegation can unilaterally withdraw from a convocation once it has been properly called. You agreed to participate when you arrived. I agreed to participate in the rites of convocation, Voidwalker said coldly. Not this farce. The Assembly voted to adopt modified procedures, Meridian reminded him. 32 delegations in favor. The vote was legitimate under the Charter. Legitimate, perhaps. What? Never. Meridian took a deep breath. This was the critical moment. If Voidwalker convinced enough delegates to withdraw, the entire process could collapse. She needed a different approach. Hierophant Voidwalker, she said, her tone shifting from procedural to respectful. May I ask you a question? He turned back slightly. Speak. Why were the rites of convocation originally established? What was their purpose? Voidwalker was silent for a long moment. To ensure that all species, large and small, powerful and weak, could be heard equally. To prevent the strong from dominating the weak through force. A noble purpose, Meridian agreed. And one that I believe Robert's rules actually serves better than the current rites. Impossible, Voidwalker scoffed. Is it? Meridian asked. Under the traditional rites, who speaks? Primarily the major powers like the crystalline hegemony and the void nexus. Smaller delegations wait weeks or months for their turn in the ritual sequence. But in the past 6 hours, we've heard from the Light Weavers, the Whisker Worlds, the Refraction Coalition, species who might have waited months under the traditional system. She pulled up her tablet. In fact, 17 delegations have spoken today who had not yet been given the floor under the rites. 17 voices that were being systematically excluded by the traditional procedure. Voidwalker's form flickered. That is, an interpretation. It's data, Jason interjected, displaying the statistics on the holographic screen. We tracked it. Under Robert's rules, any delegation can make a motion at any time, can propose amendments, can ask questions. Under the rites, you speak when it's your turn in a sequence determined 12,000 years ago based on which civilizations existed then. The Shadow Covenant's turn comes early in the sequence, Envoy Lyra noted quietly. You benefit from the traditional order, Hierophant. But many do not. Emissary Shimmer's light pulsed. The Light Weavers are always near the end of the ritual sequence. We have never spoken in a convocation before it exceeded 8 months. Today I proposed an amendment that was adopted. I have had more influence on this convocation in 6 hours than my predecessors had in 12,000 years of rites. Voidwalker shifted uncomfortably. The sequence was designed to honor the founders. To honor civilizations that may no longer exist, Councillor Granite Vein rumbled. While new civilizations equally deserving of respect, wait in silence. Is that truly honoring the founders' intent? The founders wanted equality, Meridian said gently. Robert's rules provides it. Every delegation has equal access to make motions, to debate, to vote. No one is privileged by ancient sequence. No one is silenced by ritual timing. High Priestess Ziwaxalia's harmonics rang through the chamber. Hierophant Voidwalker, I have presided over this assembly today using the human's methods. I confess I was skeptical. But I have seen more genuine deliberation, more real engagement, more actual equality than in any convocation I have previously attended. Perhaps the forms of our tradition have outlived their function. Voidwalker stood motionless for a long moment. His darkness seemed to pulse and swirl as he processed the arguments. I will not withdraw, he finally said. But neither will I pretend to support this new system. The Shadow Covenant will participate under protest. That's all we ask, Meridian said. Participate. Engage. If at the end you still believe the old ways are better, you can propose returning to them. That's another advantage of Robert's rules, they can be changed if the Assembly votes to change them. Very well, Voidwalker said, returning to his position. But I am watching Observer Cross. If this system fails to protect the interests of smaller delegations, if it allows the powerful to dominate, I will move to restore the rights immediately. Fair enough, Meridian agreed. High Priestess, shall we continue with item 3? As the Assembly returned to debating navigation rights, Meridian allowed herself a moment of relief. They'd survived the first major challenge to the new system. But she knew there would be more. The Cascades. As the convocation continued through its agenda, something unexpected began to happen. The efficiency of Robert's rules created a cascade effect that no one had anticipated. Item 3, navigation rights through the Azure Corridor, was resolved in 90 minutes through a compromise that granted shared access with scheduled traffic control. Simple, straightforward, and acceptable to all parties. But then Ambassador Thorax raised a claw during the open comment period that followed. High Priestess, I move that we add item 8 to the agenda, trade standardization in the Outer Rim territories. Zuexalia consulted with Meridian, who nodded encouragingly. Is there a second? Seconded, called Emissary Shimmer. Why are we adding items? Vextheron asked, his colors showing confusion. This was not on the original ritual schedule. Under Robert's rules, the agenda can be amended if the Assembly agrees, Meridian explained. It's your meeting. You control what gets discussed. But this has never been done, Kelshera said. Convocations address only the specific disputes that triggered them. Why? Meridian asked. You're all here, you have the time, and apparently Ambassador Thorax has identified an issue that needs addressing. Why wait for another convocation years from now? The logic was undeniable. The motion to add the trade item passed easily. Over the next 2 hours, 7 more items were added to the agenda. Resource sharing protocols. Scientific research cooperation frameworks. Cultural exchange programs. Diplomatic immunity standards. Emergency response coordination. Joint exploration initiatives. Standardized timekeeping conventions. This is remarkable, Jason whispered to Meridian. They're solving problems we didn't even know existed. Because the old system made it too costly to address anything but the most critical disputes, Meridian whispered back. When each convocation takes over a year, you only call them for existential crises. But now that they can actually accomplish things efficiently, they're treating it like an actual working government, Jason finished. By hour 8, the Assembly had resolved 11 separate issues. Delegations who had been adversaries for millennia were collaborating on proposals. The Crystalline Hegemony and the Void Nexus, fresh from their sovereignty compromise, jointly proposed a scientific research sharing agreement. I motion that we establish a permanent schedule for convocations, Envoy Lyra proposed. Rather than only convening during crises, we should meet regularly to address ongoing coordination needs. How regularly? Councillor Granite Vein asked. Quarterly, Lyra suggested. Once every 3 standard months. Hierophant Voidwalker actually laughed, a sound like wind through a crypt. You propose to hold convocations 4 times a year? When previously we could barely manage 1 per decade. Previously they took 14 months, Lyra countered. Now they take days. We could convene for a week each quarter, address accumulated issues and adjourn. It would provide predictability and prevent issues from festering into crises. The motion, after some debate and amendments, passed with only 3 dissenting votes. But as the 10th hour approached, exhaustion began to set in. Delegates who had been energized by the novelty and efficiency were starting to flag. High Priestess, Meridian said quietly, I recommend we adjourn and reconvene tomorrow. We've accomplished an extraordinary amount, but pushing further risks making poor decisions due to fatigue. I concur, Zuexalia sang. However, I am unfamiliar with the adjournment procedure. Meridian smiled. It's simple. Someone makes a motion to adjourn, it's seconded, and if it passes we stop for the day. The motion is not debatable, you just vote on it immediately. I so move, Ambassador Thorax clicked, looking as tired as an insectoid could look. Seconded, said a chorus of voices. The vote was unanimous. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, many approached Meridian directly. Observer Cross, Legate Prism said, his refracted form shimmering with what she'd learned was respect. The Refraction Coalition wishes to formally thank you. In 1 day, we have accomplished more than in years of traditional convocations. Thank Robert, not me, Meridian said, holding up the book. I just introduced you to his rules. Who is this Robert? Emissary Shimmer asked. Is he a great Earth leader? He was a military officer who got frustrated with poorly run meetings, Meridian explained. He wrote this book in 1876 to help organizations make decisions efficiently and fairly. It's been refined over the centuries by millions of people trying to work together. One human wrote this? Kelshera asked, examining her own copy of the rules that she'd requested during a break. This system that has transformed our entire governmental process? Well, one human started it, Meridian clarified. But it's the product of collaborative improvement by countless others. That's actually one of its strengths. It's not a rigid code handed down from on high. It's a living document that gets better as people use it and find ways to improve it. Vextheron approached, his colors more subdued than earlier. Observer Cross, I owe you an apology. I resisted your suggestions because I feared they would diminish our traditions. But I see now that what we were calling tradition had become mere ritual, form without function. No apology necessary, Chancellor, Meridian said warmly. Skepticism is healthy. It's what led to productive debate and good amendments. Still, Vextheron continued, the crystalline hegemony would like to propose something. When we reconvene tomorrow, I intend to move that Earth be granted a full voting seat on the Assembly, not merely observer status. Meridian blinked in surprise. That's very generous. But Earth has only been in contact with the Assembly for 2 years. We're still learning. You have taught us more in 1 day than we have learned in 12,000 years, Kelshera interrupted. The Void Nexus will second the crystalline hegemony's motion. It is time Terra took its place as a full member. As other delegates expressed their agreement, Meridian felt a surge of emotion. Earth had been petitioning for full membership since first contact, but the Assembly's traditional procedures required a century-long evaluation period. Now, in a single day, that barrier was crumbling. I'll need to consult with my superiors, she said, but I believe Earth would be honored to accept. Later, as the chamber emptied, Meridian found herself alone with Jason and Envoy Lyra. You know what's going to happen, don't you? Lyra asked, her tail swishing thoughtfully. What do you mean? Meridian replied. Every delegation here is going to return to their home governments with news of this miraculous new system. Within a year, Robert's rules will be spreading through the galaxy. Planetary assemblies, corporate boards, community organizations, everyone is going to want this. Jason grinned. The galaxy runs on Robert's rules of order. Has a nice ring to it. There's something poetic about it, Meridian mused. For 12,000 years, the Assembly preserved ancient rituals designed to ensure fairness and equality. But the rituals had calcified into obstacles. Sometimes honoring the intent of a tradition means having the courage to change its form. Deep thoughts for someone who just revolutionized galactic governance, Lyra teased. I didn't revolutionize anything, Meridian protested. I just suggested a better meeting format. You introduced the concept of continuous improvement to a government that hadn't changed in 12 millennia, Lyra countered. That's revolutionary whether you intended it or not. As they left the Grand Convocation Chamber, Meridian looked back at the obsidian pillars and ancient glyphs. Tomorrow they would reconvene and continue the work. But the chamber itself would never be the same. The weight of 12,000 years of rigid tradition had been replaced by something lighter but stronger. The principle that process should serve people, not the other way around. The new order. The second day of the convocation began with an energy entirely different from the ritual solemnity of 48 hours earlier. Delegates arrived early, many of them carrying their own copies of Robert's rules that had been transmitted overnight. Small groups clustered in the antechambers, discussing strategy and forming coalitions. This is what a functioning government looks like, Jason observed, watching Ambassador Thorax and Councillor Granite Vein huddled in animated conversation with several smaller delegations. Meridian nodded. Under the old system, there was no point in coalition building before the convocation because everything was predetermined by ritual. Now they're actually politicking. When High Priestess Zuexalia called the assembly to order, the first order of business was Chancellor Vextheron's motion to grant Earth full membership. The debate was brief but meaningful. Hierophant Voidwalker, true to his nature, questioned whether 2 years was sufficient to understand galactic politics. But his objection was measured, thoughtful, and ultimately withdrawn after Envoy Lyra pointed out that Terra had demonstrated more understanding of effective governance in 1 day than some member species had shown in millennia. The vote was 38 in favor, 4 against, 5 abstentions. Earth was now a full member of the Galactic Coordination Assembly. Meridian stood as applause, in its various species-specific forms, filled the chamber. On behalf of the people of Earth, I accept with profound gratitude and humility. We look forward to contributing as full partners in the work of building a more coordinated and peaceful galaxy. She paused, then added with a slight smile, and I move that we continue with item 9 on the agenda, emergency response coordination. Laughter rippled through the chamber, delegates appreciating that even in this historic moment, the new Earth representative was keeping them on task. The rest of the day proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Emergency response protocols were established, including a rapid response force that could be deployed by a 2/3 vote of the Assembly within 48 hours of a crisis. Joint exploration guidelines were drafted, balancing scientific cooperation with individual species' territorial claims. Cultural exchange programs were formalized, creating structured opportunities for species to learn from each other. By mid-afternoon, they had cleared the entire expanded agenda. I move we adjourn, Emissary Shimmer said, her light pulsing with satisfaction. Wait, Kelshera interrupted. I have new business. Zuexalia recognized her, and the High Arbiter stood with unusual solemnity. The events of the past 2 days have forced the Void Nexus to reconsider many assumptions, Kelshera began. For 6,000 years, we have been at war with the crystalline hegemony. We told ourselves this conflict was inevitable, that our differences were irreconcilable, that peace was impossible. She turned to face Vextheron directly. We were wrong. Not about the legitimacy of our claims, those remain valid. But about the necessity of conflict. In 24 hours, we have resolved disputes that we could have resolved millennia ago, had we been willing to try a different approach. Vextheron's colors shifted through a complex pattern Meridian had never seen before. The Void Nexus hereby proposes a formal peace treaty with the crystalline hegemony, Kelshera declared. Not a temporary ceasefire. Not a conditional armistice. A permanent peace, with mutual recognition, normalized relations, and a commitment to resolve future disputes through this assembly rather than through warfare. The chamber fell absolutely silent. Then Vextheron rose, his form blazing with brilliant white light. The crystalline hegemony accepts, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. After 6,000 years, it is time for peace. The chamber erupted. Delegates who moments before had been calmly working through agenda items were now standing, cheering, celebrating. Even Hierophant Voidwalker's darkness seemed to pulse with something approaching joy. Meridian felt tears on her cheeks. She'd come to this convocation hoping to introduce some basic procedural efficiency. She'd never imagined she would witness the end of a 6,000-year war. Observer, sorry Representative Cross, Ambassador Thorax clicked, approaching with his entire delegation. The Hive Collective has a proposal. We would like Terra to serve as the neutral host for the peace treaty signing ceremony. It seems appropriate that the species who brought this possibility should witness its culmination. Earth would be deeply honored, Meridian said, her voice thick with emotion. Over the next hour, the details of the treaty were hammered out using the same efficient process they'd applied to every other issue. Terms of peace. Recognition of borders. Mutual defense cooperation. Economic integration timelines. Reparation schedules that built on the agreements they'd already reached. It was, Meridian reflected, the most beautiful implementation of Robert's rules she'd ever witnessed. A centuries-old meeting procedure from Earth, helping to end a millennia-old conflict in the stars. As the convocation drew to a close, High Priestess Zuexalia made an announcement. Before we adjourn, I wish to note for the record that this convocation has accomplished in 2 days what would have traditionally required 14 months. We have resolved territorial disputes, established joint governance, created peace from ancient warfare, and laid the groundwork for unprecedented cooperation. Her harmonics swelled with significance. I therefore move that the Galactic Coordination Assembly formally adopt Robert's Rules of Order as our standard procedure for all future convocations, subject to modifications as needed to accommodate our diverse species. The motion was seconded immediately by at least a dozen delegates. The debate was brief. Even Hierophant Voidwalker spoke in favor. I resisted this change, he admitted. I feared the loss of our traditions. But I see now that our greatest tradition is the pursuit of justice and equality. If Robert's rules serve that tradition better than the ancient rites, then we honor our ancestors by embracing them. The vote was unanimous. As delegates began to depart, many stopped to speak with Meridian. Some thanked her. Others invited her to visit their home worlds. Several asked if Earth had other useful innovations to share. We have plenty of problems of our own, Meridian said with a laugh. But we've been working on this whole democracy thing for a while. I'm sure we can share some lessons learned. Chancellor Vex Theron was among the last to leave. Representative Cross, he said, I have been involved in galactic politics for 300 years. I have attended 17 convocations. This is the first one that has given me hope for our collective future. The hope was always there, Chancellor, Meridian replied. You just needed a process that could unlock it. After everyone had gone, Meridian stood alone in the Grand Convocation Chamber with Jason and her worn copy of Robert's Rules. You know this is going to be in every history book, right? Jason said. The day Terra brought parliamentary procedure to the galaxy and accidentally ended a 6,000-year war. Not accidentally, Meridian corrected gently. The procedure worked exactly as designed. It gave people a way to listen to each other, to compromise, to build solutions together. That's not an accident. That's what good governance looks like. She ran her hand along one of the ancient obsidian pillars, feeling the glyphs carved by civilizations long gone. The founders of this assembly wanted justice and equality, she mused. They created elaborate rituals to protect those values. But somewhere along the way the rituals became more important than the values they were meant to serve. What we did here wasn't destroying tradition, it was rediscovering it. Deep thoughts, Jason said. But also, you should probably write this all up for the report. Meridian laughed. A report about how I accidentally revolutionized galactic governance by bringing a 19th-century meeting manual to an alien assembly? That's going to be a fun one to write. As they walked out of the chamber, Meridian took one last look back. The space felt different now. The weight of 12,000 years had lifted, replaced by the promise of what could be built with proper procedure and genuine cooperation. In her bag, Robert's Rules of Order rested alongside her tablet and the ceremonial documents, making Earth a full member of the Galactic Coordination Assembly. A human military officer from the 1870s had written a book to help people run better meetings. 150 years later, that book had helped end a 6,000-year war. Sometimes, Meridian reflected, the most powerful weapons aren't ships or soldiers or ancient rituals. Sometimes they're just good ideas, properly organized and efficiently implemented. As the lights dimmed in the Grand Convocation Chamber, the ancient glyphs seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. 12,000 years of tradition watching over a new era of cooperation. The rituals had been ruined, perhaps. But something better had been born.